Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. In this week's gospel, the disciples choose silence when they should have spoken up. Fear of the unknown silences them as they wrestle with Jesus' talk of suffering and death. We often fall into that same trap, avoiding hard conversations and hiding behind pride. The message this week calls us to break the silence, embrace humility, and find strength in honest questions and faith-filled connections with one another. I remember hearing a comedian talking about getting into trouble at a bar. He got thrown out, and there was further discussion outside that led to the police being called. I just remember that he said that when they showed up, he had the right to remain silent, but he didn't have the ability. Well, that's a far cry from the disciples in this week's gospel. There are definitely two different occasions when they should not have remained silent, when the first occasion leading to the second. This is the second time that Jesus has been talking about his pathway to the cross in the book of Mark, and this time no one says anything. They needed to speak, but chose to remain silent. I can relate to their fear, though. They've left their lives behind, and now the guy that they've been following, the guy they've staked everything on, is once again sounding like he's okay with it all just going down the tubes. He's even talking about dying. Getting left behind can evoke some serious emotions, feelings, and fears. Have you ever been in a situation where you were really uncomfortable, fearful, or maybe embarrassed, so that your mind was racing with questions, trying to understand, but you just could not manage to say anything? The feeling doesn't seem to move through your brain, but more through your gut. The gut doesn't demand that things be logical or rational. So if we don't ask or say anything, it seems to somehow forestall reality. Talking about it sometimes just makes it feel too real. It feels like some of that is going on with the disciples. That and a blend of maybe if we don't say anything, he'll forget about it. Or maybe through their silence, they are trying to shame him into their rationality so that he just goes a little more with the flow. There's probably some serious group dynamics going on here too. Have you ever had a question that you really wanted to ask but didn't because you're afraid of how everyone else would react? I know that happens. We feel embarrassed and fearful that our line of thinking isn't the same as the group, or that people will think we're trying to upstage them, or a multitude of other reasons. That's happened within our faith. Here with the disciples, I think it's their own inhibitions. But down the road, the church sinned and began to take advantage of this phenomenon. In the church's history, questioning could get you cast out, tortured, or killed. The church said, here are the facts. Do what you are told, and if you don't, it's off to hell for you. Let's think about the healing, caring, and self-sacrificial Jesus we see in the gospel. Let's think about the Jesus of the cross. We see nothing but grace, compassion, and mercy there. The church of all places should have a big sign that says, if you see something or hear something you don't understand, please feel free to ask. We have permission. Actually, we have the messianic encouragement to admit weakness. Acknowledgement of our weaknesses is humility. It's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to acknowledge it. We are called to follow the one who, though he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, assuming human likeness. And being found in appearance as human, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. The other moment of silence is directly related to humility or the lack thereof. Feeling out of control is scary. What happens with the disciples when they're hearing Jesus talk about his death? Well, they default to the gotta be strong mentality and trying to pump themselves up and trying to suppress confusion and fear and trying to mask it all. They get into an argument about who is the greatest. Bluster and acting out is a pretty popular coping mechanism when we are faced with fear. We don't want, once again, to show weakness or even acknowledge it. We go so far as to feel shame or pity for those who do. When Jesus confronts them, silence. Caught with their hands in the proverbial cookie jar. This wasn't the first time that Jesus had talked of his impending capture and death. Because of our fear of feeling weak in the face of painful discussions, it sometimes just feels easier to avoid or to change the subject. Well, in preparing this message, I was struggling a bit. I knew there was something there, but I couldn't latch on to anything. Words were just getting put down, but I didn't feel anything meaningful. Well, I was talking to my son about the passage, and he liked the general idea, but it wasn't truly connecting. As it turns out, what was getting slid out to the edges, he felt was an important message for him. He asked me to check out a song by two rappers that started out with a single collaboration in their lives, only to become a group called Run the Jewels. I read the lyrics first and was really struck by them. They go to the heart of this message. Lay people in unexpected places, speaking truths that we need to hear. Those should not be unexpected places in our lives. As the church, there needs to be more listening. We have to grant the same permission for honesty and what we perceive as weakness as Jesus did. In reality, far more strength and power lay in humbling himself than in coercion or force. Listen to these lyrics of a song called Thursday in the Danger Room. It's poetry. It's confession and honesty expressed about a real life experience. Right for right, wrong for wrong. This is clearly not life's design. Figure out quickly that nothing gets answered when you ask the universe why. Life is a journey, but living's the worry. To love is to lose your mind. But living's a blessing, so I'm not stressing, 'cause some of my friends ain't survived. That's the release, but it's much bigger pieces. I'm living on limited time. Like, how do you look in the eyes of a friend and not cry when you know that they are dying? How do you feel about yourself when you know that sometimes you had wished they were gone? Not because you didn't love them, but just because you felt too weak to be strong. You couldn't bear to see someone who prided themselves on the strength to feel weak. You prove to your randomness, hold it for ransom, that life will not fade in your dreams. You see that they're fighting and you know that they're losing, but still you make jokes and you laugh because you know despite all the sadness that you better get the good times while they last. Now, every new word that they speak, you are already feeling like it's in the bag. And when they all gone, you just try to move on because the memory's hurting too bad. Grown up so much, and I wonder who'd you'd have become if you'd stuck for a while. Just know that I love you, good friend. Ain't gonna forget you. And when I remember, I smile. And I guess I'd say I'll see you soon, but the truth is that I see you now. Still talk to you like you're around. And I guess I say you left too soon, but the truth is you never left, 'cause I never let myself forget. An eye for an eye, the tooth for the tooth will leave us all mumbling and blind. So we stumble blind through the depths of the dark, looking for something divine. Life is a journey, to live is to suffer, and I have been suffering through mine. I think the church's historical method would be to respond that we don't express ourselves in rock and roll or rap music or poetry or modern art or things we don't understand or seek to understand because they're too human or earthy. And we try to be territorial and ignore expressions from outside of our walls. But to do so makes the same mistake that the disciples are making. Like the artist said, we're on a journey. As they see, we aren't on the journey alone. When we share, when we communicate in humility, we connect. We bear one another's burdens. As I reflect on the disciples' silence, I realize that they, like us, were caught in tension between fear and faith. They stayed silent in moments when they should have spoken up, and they argue about greatness when they could have embraced humility. It's easy for us to look back and to criticize, but the truth is that we're all navigating that same struggle. We all have moments of silence when we should be asking questions, voicing our doubts, and admitting our weaknesses. We get caught up in our pride, trying to project strength, when true strength is found in humility, in the willingness to acknowledge our fears and to lean on one another for support. The disciples were on a journey with Jesus, but that journey wasn't about them always having the right answers or being perfect. It was about growth, about learning to trust in the one who was walking alongside them, even when the path seemed uncertain. And that's our journey too. We're not called to have it all figured out, to be perfect Christians, or to act like we're always in control. We're called to be honest, to be humble, to ask the hard questions, and to walk together in faith, trusting that Jesus is leading us, even when we don't fully understand. Let's create spaces in our churches, in our communities, and in our own hearts, where we can be real about our struggles, our doubts, and our fears. We must be willing to listen, not just to those we expect to hear from, but to the unexpected voice speaking truth into our lives, whether that's through a rap lyric, a poem, or a conversation with a friend. It's time to break the silence, to open ourselves up to God's grace and to one another.